Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the APPG on Apprenticeships. Thank you so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome today Theresa Villiers MP as our chair for this event, and Minister Kevin Hollinrake. Just a few bits of housekeeping before we kick off. We will have a discussion between Theresa and the Minister first, then followed by Q&A from the public. If there's members of Parliament or peers in the room, we will give them, or on call, we'll give them priority as an APPG, followed by opening up to questions from the public as well. You can either raise your hand on the call or pop a question in the chat. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Theresa.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank the APPG for Apprenticeships for setting this up, and a warm thank you as well to the Minister for being here. As I've said many times in these meetings, I'm a tremendous enthusiast for apprenticeships as a way to boost our economic competitiveness, to ensure our workforce has the skills it needs, but also as a tremendously important engine of social mobility, giving people great chances to get on and realise their dreams in life. So it is great that we're all in Parliament marking National Apprenticeships Week. As a practical matter, if any of you are tweeting, please tag @Apprentice APPG when referring to this session. So I would like to really focus on, first of all, with the Minister, accessibility of apprenticeships for small businesses. How can we make it easier for small businesses to take on apprentices, and how do we make it more attractive for SMEs to take on apprentices?
Yes, and as small business minister, I'm very focused on that myself. Can I just touch on a point before we go into the SME part of it, just on apprenticeships generally? As you know, Theresa, we believe in a high-skilled, high-wage economy. So this is about skills, of course,
yes.
Genuinely skilled people, and the quality of apprenticeship is really important, yeah. Of course. But obviously, the other route as an apprentice most people choose is to go to university if they want to learn their skills. But having been to university myself, actually Sheffield Poly as it was, Sheffield Hallam University now. The thing you're at university thinking, am I going to get a job at the end of this when you do the university course? Well, as an apprentice, of course, you've got a job already. It is a job, and that's the wonderful thing about this. You learn skills on the job, so it's a win-win situation. And that's why it's a win-win for SMEs too, of course, because you get people not just training but also working at the same time and learning their skills on the job, which you and I know is the best form of training. So obviously alongside that are the courses that are delivered by approved training providers to make sure the skills they're learning outside the workplace are good too. So in terms of SMEs, absolutely right. Well, the government's putting £2.7 billion into this, of course, and that largely funds SMEs. The 95% of the cost of SME apprenticeships are funded by the government. If you get a 16 to 18-year-old, that's 100%. You also get £1,000 for taking that person on. So it's the funding is there to do it, first and foremost. Quite right, that happens. What we also have the opportunity to do is larger companies can pass on their funds to smaller companies. That's really important.
And how do we make it easier for that to happen?
That's a good question. That's what DFE look after apprentices, and we feed into their work on this, of course. But and we want to make it easier. We want to make that whole landscape of apprenticeships easier while still retaining the quality. Yeah. And we can remember politically early on when we rolled this out, we get lots of criticisms about the quality of apprenticeships. It's vitally important. We have really, really high quality apprenticeships. So yes, we want to make the system simpler, including the transfer of funds from larger employers into SMEs and into their supply chains, which big companies are really key to do. So looking to make that easier, and possibly looking at can they transfer more of those unused funds down into their supply chains so they can take on more apprentices, or making it all easier while still retaining the quality is the key.
And any chance of some changes to the apprenticeship levy facilitate those changes that you've been talking about?
Well, it's being reformed all the time to make sure the courses are more relevant, quality is high, but also some of the courses can be shorter, which is good. So it's something we look at all the time. And fundamentally, we're conservatives, we believe in freedom. The people that are best placed to decide how to train their people should be employers, not governments, of course. But we know from past history that we weren't spending as much on training, high quality training as other nations were, and other nations were benefiting, certainly in terms of technical education as a result. So that's why I brought in T-levels, apprenticeships. You, like I, I'm sure, met the apprenticeship fair put on by the APPG only a couple of nights ago. It was a fantastic event. You see those apprentices who are learning on the job at Aston Martin, British Aerospace, all these wonderful companies at Babcock, all these really good companies, Amazon, but also smaller companies as well. And you saw the kind of eagerness on the apprenticeships faces when you're talking to them. They're really proud of the jobs they've got in those organisations. I mean, it's pretty cool working for Aston Martin, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I was so envious actually. And these are the kind of opportunities that are available to young people, as well as the businesses that we also try and look after.
And we've got this massive transition to net zero over the next few years.
Yeah.
So has the government been looking at how it can use that as an opportunity to deliver more apprenticeships, and how can apprenticeship training help us tackle that massive programme that we're going to have to be undertaking?
Yeah, I mean, net zero, clearly climate change is a crisis. Every crisis brings opportunities, and it's a massive opportunity for SMEs. Who, the wonderful thing about SMEs, they are so fleet of foot, of course, and they really, most of the innovation I see doesn't come from big companies thinking outside the box. It's about small companies thinking new ideas and taking them forward. So one opportunity for SMEs in terms of green, in terms of decarbonisation and new green jobs. So we've got the Green Jobs Task Force, of course, looking at all this, working employers with government and officials, working together, public sector and private sector, as it should work, a hand-in-hand approach. A green apprenticeship body as well, advisory body, looking at apprenticeships, making sure they are really making sure the apprenticeships themselves are delivering skills for the future, whether it be fitting heat pumps, whether it be in terms of insulation, whether it be working on wind farms or whatever else it is. All those things are huge opportunities. We've got to make sure the skills align to that. 650 courses now, of course, in apprenticeships, covering engineering, covering many things, maintenance, installation. We've got T-levels covering engineering, maintenance, installation now as well. Instead of normal sixth form, the A-level routes, we've got proper technical skills being taught in our schools, which is wonderful. We know that the world of work has changed dramatically because of Brexit, but also because of COVID. So I think there's a much greater focus now with the employers I speak to, both in my constituency and within my day job as business minister, know that their focus has got to be skilling their own workforce. And this isn't just about young people, don't forget. Apprenticeships work for anybody of any age, of course. So we can reskill our workforce through these routes, and we need to do it, and employers know we need to do it. And it's really good for business. You build such loyalty through training people within your own organisation. So lots of opportunities right through the different range of business sizes, but not least for SMEs.
I'm so pleased that you mentioned home heating, because that's obviously one of the most difficult things about the transition. And there does seem to me to be a bit of a history of some of, for example, the insulation programmes, where they've not progressed as much as they could do, partly because we don't have enough skilled people to do the work. Yeah. So it would be really good if you could expand on how you see apprenticeships and training being stepped up, essentially. So we've got the workforce we need to deliver those vital net zero programs.
And you're right to say that. You know, we both from the Green Deal, which wasn't particularly successful, and the Green Homes grants. You know, there's got to be a meeting of both the available funds, the grants that are available, and the skilled workforce. And there was a mismatch in terms of Green Homes grant. You know, the funds were there, skilled and approved workforce wasn't, because I think there's been some problems before in terms of schemes that are exploited. We can't see that either. This is taxpayers' money. So we've got to think more strategically in terms of how we provide the funding to make sure we decarbonise our homes, of course, be it through heat pumps or insulation. So you've got to make sure the workforce is there, and whilst the funds there as well. So the funds are being distributed now in a different way through local authorities, which was a more successful part of the scheme, of course. £6 billion going into homes and businesses in terms of helping that decarbonisation. It's an awful lot of money, as we know. But what businesses are really good at is spotting opportunities. As long as they think that opportunity will be there in a year's time, or 2 years' time, or 5 years' time, you've got to give businesses the certainty these programs are still going to be there, and then they'll invest. And so that's definitely a job of government and a job of people like me and Rob Halfon and others to link up with John Glenn and Treasury to make sure we put schemes together that have longevity, and then businesses will step in and fill those gaps.
Tremendously important. And a question that's been raised with the APPG is the apprenticeship minimum wage and how apprentices access funding support with their cost of living. Are there any sort of changes contemplated in that? Any chance of the apprenticeship minimum wage being raised?
Yes, it has been raised. It's been raised very, very large amount, over 9%. And I think this is all decided upon by the local commission, of course. So the national minimum wage, living wage, of course, is goes to 10.42, and it's risen by 9.7%. I think I'm right in saying so. And all the different levels of minimum wage, because they do vary by age, are increasing by a similar amount in percentage terms. I think we've got to be careful, of course, with businesses, because businesses are struggling under lots of pressures right now, cost of living pressures in terms of supply chains, energy costs, which we're supporting them with, and it's costing the taxpayer tens of billions of pounds to do that, of course. So we don't want to load businesses with too much pressure in terms of too much costs. Because the biggest cost most of the time on businesses is people you employ. So it's a balance, Theresa, and I think you and I understand that. And so we have to do this stuff progressively. As I said right at the start, we want that high-skilled, high-wage economy. I'd love to see those minimum wages at higher levels, as you would too. That's really good all round, and it actually reduces the pressure on the welfare system itself, because we're subsidising wages through lots of different ways, like universal credit and through housing and other mechanisms like that. So the higher we have our minimum wages, and higher wages are generally, the better it's going to be in terms of taxpayer supporting in other ways, which is quite a perverse way to remunerate people. So yes, it's definitely going in the right direction, but we'd all like to see it go faster.
And is there more that we could be encouraging SMEs to do to support apprentices into full-time positions and long-term full-time roles after finishing their apprenticeship?
There's always more we can do, but it's a real success story now. 41% of apprentices are employed in SMEs, private properties. Huge number of apprentices. I think last year was 750,000 apprentices last year. Phenomenal, about 5.3 million since the whole scheme started. It's a huge success story. Yes, of course, there's more we can do. Making sure the training courses are relevant and well supported is really important. There's transfer of funds, of course. But the great statistic is, I think 92% of apprenticeships go into full-time work at the end of the apprenticeship. That's a phenomenal statistic. 90% in sustained employment. So again, I said right at the start, these are jobs from day one. So you are in employment. All you have to do is learn well on the job, work hard, prove that you're valuable to that employer, and there should be it's a very good likelihood there's a job there at the end of the day, probably with an employer with now, which is what they want. That makes sense for everybody. You want good people you're training to stay with you, and that's what every employer wants. It's the biggest, I think the number one thing in all the engagement I have with businesses on a daily basis is they've got the real labour supply shortages. So crying out for good people. So if you're a good person doing an apprenticeship, there's a very, very good chance you'll get the job.
There is clearly some excellent news on apprenticeships. And I'd also like to ask you how apprenticeships can support another of the government's big programmes, which is Levelling Up. Because ensuring that we have effective skills programmes around the country, I think can play a hugely important role. So what's the government doing to try and harness this good news on apprenticeships to deliver its Levelling Up ambitions?
Yeah, we can imagine. Myself as a proud northerner, I'm really keen on levelling up generally. So and there's lots of things we do. This is a big task to level up. Let's be honest about this. The disparity in terms of average output and therefore effectively salaries between the northeast and the southeast is is as wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification. That took 3 decades. So it's a massive thing we need to do in terms of making sure we have more infrastructure in the north, of course. And that's been, in the past, it's been too much infrastructure in the southeast, and advice not in the north, particularly, and the Midlands and other parts of the country. So the Treasury's fixed that with the Green Book calculation now, so we'll see a lot more infrastructure in the north, of course, which means lots more jobs, which means even on the job in actually building infrastructure and the housing and the rest of the stuff that goes with it, which means lots more apprentices. So yes, a key part of levelling up, and we want good skilled people right around the country. There's some really good productivity stats coming out now from Manchester, for example, which is it's increasing productivity, particularly those in London. So really good news we're seeing in this area. So levelling up is starting to happen, but jobs, skills, apprenticeships are all a part of this. And but the more successful the economy becomes in the North, Midlands, the rest of it will lead to those jobs and those apprentice opportunities.
And I really hope that our new procurement rules give more scope to specify that people winning those public contracts take apprenticeships really seriously as well.
Yeah, really excited about that. As a bill that's starting in the Lords, but it really has lots of implications for my department, for SMEs. It's really good. So it means that it's much easier then for SMEs to procure, to look for contracts within the public sector. I think 19 billion already goes to SMEs in terms of public sector procurement. It's so much higher. So we need a real focus for that. We're simplifying, for example, in the past, for you to bid for a contract in the supply chain, or a big contract, somebody's got a big contract, they had some insurance in place, so already been paid for. We're removing that requirement, so you don't have the insurance in place until you actually won the contract. It's a sensible reform. A number of things like that we're doing to make it easier for SMEs to get into public sector in terms of procurement. Lots more we can do that I'm really keen to do in my role. So it's a wonderful example, for example, in Preston, where the local authority has, instead of just procuring stuff with the lowest bidder, which is often a large company, large facilities company, they're using SMEs as a priority. It's more work in terms of procurement, but what are benefits to that place? We do that much more often around the country. Keen to roll out that kind of best practice to make sure SMEs get more of a bite of those very valuable contracts that our local authorities provide or national government provide.
And I have one last question before we open it up. A plug for what my local university, Middlesex, is doing alongside Barnet Hospital. They've got a great programme for apprentice nurses, and be really good if the government was really sort of pushing the public sector to be part of the apprentice revolution. And because we all know we've got skill shortages and workforce issues in the NHS, one of the ways to plug them is to skill up perhaps healthcare assistants who may want to take on these new professional qualifications.
Yes, definitely. And right across the piece. So often when we think about the apprenticeship, we just think about the private sector, don't we? For the public sector, I think £340 billion of annual public sector procurement, massive opportunity right through that. So whether it's apprenticeship skilling up and growing our own workforce, which we would all love to see, rather than relying simply on people from different parts of the world, we look first and foremost to train people in our own young people and people throughout the different age ranges, of course. And that's definitely the message I'm getting back from employers. That's much more of a focus now than it was 5, 6 years ago, which is welcome. Lots more we can do with the NHS as well. We've got in my department looking for something called looking at something called a payment cash flow review, which is making sure SMEs get paid more quickly, right across the really important. And that's something we need to focus on in things like the NHS too. So it can't just be about all this conversation. It's not just about the private sector, it's also about the public sector.
Great. Well, thank you for answering all my questions. So questions from around the room. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Brett Hanford of the Builders and Plumbers Merchants Federation. So thank you. It wasn't my script that you read out about heat pumps and insulation 5 minutes ago, but thank you for giving us the plug, as the Minister will know. I think you're onto something here, trying to harness apprentices with levelling up, because we have companies in every constituency. Some of you know, because I badger you on a constituency basis. But my question therefore has to go to the elephant in the room of parents. Parents still think that their young darlings are not, are above being modern day talent or whatever it is, and that therefore they need to go to university. What role does either MPs or government itself have in a way that business can't reach to slay that dragon that, if you want to be, and the language I think is partly important in that in some of the work we do, people say, well, you're concerned about the planet, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you become a carbon consultant? And that could be
I've no
modern day in terms of advanced heating in ways that we haven't got fuels that we don't let go of.
Yeah. So, what a good point. I mean, and I go around workplaces, my constituency, I have a wonderful one called James Fisher, who look at decommissioning nuclear
there's the Craig in Welsh government as
really
well.
fantastic job. Our marshals to be competent in the defence sector. And the defence is there. And they say, and I always ask them,
There's a couple of bits to it really. One is around
and
what
it's usually something like
do,
an uncle or a
where
brother.
their sort of
Very,
strategic workforce plan is, or
and
where
the
their
one thing
future
is not
requirements
usually
are,
school.
and then how that links
So
into
we've
what
got
we've
to tackle
got
that. Well,
available.
not just parents. We've got to tackle that kind of
The apprenticeships and graduate offerings,
thinking,
but I think essentially it's a positive thing because they're offering.
improving.
Is there any support they can offer?
My daughter's now looking for work, and I sent her as an apprentice the other day.
Where what we're doing, we have some
Apprentices in the fair of the day.
schools and things, they're asking
So,
us
if I'm
So,
changing, other
I just
people.
didn't want to go and I mean like
I'm
that.
changing, other people might change too. So I think that's improving, and I think you're right about quality. You know, who would object to their young son, daughter going to work for Aston Martin? You know, apprenticeship for Aston Martin. So I think those inspirational stories are really important. But I think we've also got to get the message further into schools. This is really something you should be pushing. And it's a body of work we're doing with it, with the DFE, in terms of trying to make sure the schools are more aligned to that kind of thinking. I think we've got a role to play as members of Parliament too. I'm running a technical and engineering apprenticeship fair in my patch with all those wonderful engineering companies, bringing the schools in, bringing young people in. I think we can get the message out there too, that these are really cool businesses to work for. And this is really the best way to get into work for those companies.
Next question.
Chris Cook from the Nuclear Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, based up in Rotherham, and part of the University of Sheffield. And I have to mention the University of Sheffield, I think, also offers some excellent nursing apprenticeships. I mean, it's really interesting looking at what we're seeing happening in the nuclear industry and the challenge of delivering the engineering skills that we need to see to deliver on net zero, and in our case, specifically thinking about the nuclear challenge. We work with the University of Derby and Rolls-Royce to open a new nuclear skills academy in Derby. Opened its doors in September, 200 apprentices. Applications number about 1,200.
Wow.
There's a massive demand.
Brilliant.
And we're now seeing a real demand from across the nuclear sector, including fusion, including the new UK AEA STEP programme up in Nottinghamshire, for more apprentices. So we're looking at how we can do that. I think the challenge we have is really plugging that into the supply chain, working with the primes. We work with about 3,500 SMEs and so on across the nuclear landscape across the UK. So using that reach to help those companies access apprenticeships on the back of the attraction that the Rolls-Royce and others can offer. But we also need to think about the university landscape and the role that they play here, because I think there are sometimes concerns that maybe they don't get the recognition for delivering apprenticeships through the teaching excellence framework, but also how you simplify that landscape. So I'm really interested to hear you talking about that, but what does that mean in practice for university providers and for organisations like ours with the opportunity to reach out and work with a number of partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing now, of course, with the advent of degree apprenticeships, it's not either or, is it? You can have 170,000 people gone for the degree apprenticeship route. And again, young people I spoke to, I think on Monday night, was exactly that. Lots of people on degree apprenticeship, really proud of what they were doing, and the fact they're getting paid to do it, which is quite attractive too, for sure. So yes, of course, we want more joined up thinking right across the piece, doesn't it? It's not a case of all our education and our workplaces should be far more joined up than they are. So it's good to see that the apprenticeship courses themselves are largely employer-led. So it's absolutely right, education is responsive to employers' requirements, and we've more work to do in this area, of course, because again, when I talk to employers, if I talk to them about the careers and enterprise companies, a lot of them never heard of it. So, and that's supposed to be one there to connect obviously education with the workplace. I think the same with universities. Really keen to see them working more closely with employers, particularly some of the ones you're having your membership, and make sure that they're very responsive to your needs and the future skills that we've got in the country, because we know the world of work is changing. We know the dynamic of how we're going to run our economy, especially in terms of energy transition, is changing rapidly. So we need to be ahead of the game in terms of making sure the two skills sit together. I think the more joint working we have across government, I think that will facilitate that. And I work very closely with DFE, Rob Health and others to make sure that we are more joined up.
I think the degree apprenticeship concept has so many strengths, and it's really important that the message gets out about that as an alternative to sort of one or the other. You get essentially both.
Yes.
I think I saw a hand up at the end of the table, and then we'll head out to the virtual questions in a moment. And Nick, what's the question to you?
Thank you very much, Antonia. I'm from Multiverse. We're an apprenticeship training provider. And thank you very much for chatting, and I agree with everything you said, particularly about degree apprenticeships, as we became the first apprenticeship provider to get degree awarding powers. So that was very exciting, and we're hoping to bring lots more degree apprenticeships to young people across the UK. My question was around removing barriers to SMEs to receive funding from larger corporations when they have transferred funding. So we work with a lot of big and small companies. We've recently done a really big campaign with Sky that's transferring £1 million to SMEs across the country, and we found that there's a lot of demand for it. But the SMEs that we work with have often stated that they have barriers when it comes to using the digital apprenticeship service, and there's quite a lot of steps. There's about 8 steps that need to happen between the donor organization and the receiving organization. And then also there's some other sort of quirks in the system where you have to reserve funding by a certain date, otherwise it will get transferred, or you'll have to seek co-investment. These are things that we've spoken to DFE about and many other organizations, but I just wanted to understand whether you heard similar gripes and what the government view on these are.
Sure, thanks. Multiverse is a fantastic organisation, and how well timed in terms of meeting the need of businesses and apprentices. Yes, I hear that all the time. And whether it be Lloyds Bank or whether it be smaller organisations, I think I've seen in terms of the funding, I think it's limited amount to 25% of your funds being transferred, and lots of people are wanting more. I've seen different kind of asks ranging from 40% to 80%. So we need to look at that and decide what the reasons are that we're holding that back, because it seems a sensible thing to do. There's usually a good reason behind things in terms of why we do these things. Usually it's about quality or making sure that there's good checks and balances in place to meet certain concerns that we have. So it's not there for the wrong reasons, but sometimes we should be able to block that. And certainly the 8 steps you talk about, that's very worrying in terms of complexity around that. So yes, I would like to see more funds released. We don't want to see the money go. If this is the right thing to do with our levy, with our money, it's that clearly employers are effectively setting aside for training. He doesn't want to go back to the government, does it? He wants to be training people. That's where we want it. So absolutely right that we look what's happening there and simplify it and make it easier, and also increase the potential for money to go into their supply chains. But the thing we should, I think is really important resource for SMEs, which I mentioned, is local authorities. They've got a big part to play here. My local authority gives an additional grant of £2,000 to an SME who takes an apprentice. So go to your local authority, they can be a really good resource for people who are thinking of going down this route.
Nick, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Minister. I think some of the issues that we've got about young people not wanting to do apprenticeships, that especially in the north, there's less people actually gone to university in the past than there is now. And now, obviously, that north-south divide is gradually disappearing. Obviously, the university has disappeared quite a bit. But all I'm trying to say is, parents, this first generation is going to university in the north, and now all of a sudden we're telling them it's probably not the best way to do it. They should get back into an apprenticeship again.
Yeah.
I think that's just something that we need to be careful of. And I genuinely do think, I've been self-employed all my life, so I always think it's my fault. I've got to get out there and do it. And I think that's what MPs should be doing. We should be going out there as individuals and really selling apprenticeships. Because I mean, we've got a Secretary of State now doing an apprenticeship. I did an apprenticeship, and lots of. So I do think we've all got a job as members of Parliament to get out there and sell this, and that more so in the north. I really do think there's some fantastic opportunities in the north, which is through apprenticeship. But I really just want to get back to somebody talking about nurses. I think the nurses and we need to get apprenticeship. I cannot understand why we seem to have gone away from this model where all nurses have to go to university now, and we've got young people who learn so much actually on the job in a day release. So, and I genuinely think, I know police is probably slightly different, but like you said, local authorities, there's so much of those public sector jobs that we could really push forward on. And I've employed apprentices all my life, and after that first 6 months, that first 12 months, they really do offer so much to the workforce. It's absolutely, once you've got through that first year can be quite challenging, especially young people on building sites. Health and safety can be an issue, and it just, well, it can, and because they've just not got that sixth sense that you get. But I just think once you've got by that first year, you've got somebody who's willing, able, wants to learn, and you really need to be pushing into these sectors where we're struggling, and nursing and care, as well as engineering, which has been predominantly apprentices. Nursing and care is something that the government can really champion, and so can the safety APPG.
Yeah, so I totally agree, Nick, and do definitely push on our health ministers in terms of what you said right now. So, I mean, what an opportunity for the country and for those young people. I think there's no doubt there's been lots of improvement in terms of quality, and I think those mixed messages you mentioned before, say go to university, go to apprenticeship. I think Brett's point earlier, the more we make the point that these courses are quality courses that result in quality jobs at the end of it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's the opportunity for my children, my folk is not which university they went to or what route they took, is they end up in a job they love and that's well remunerated and they can be proud of, and it gives us the skills for life. Just to find out before, but I absolutely agree with you. We as MPs have got a huge role to play. I'm really my fair, really keen to do it, and I know lots of young people will be probably come into that and see those opportunities where they wouldn't have done before. So I think we have got the role to play.
I've just very quickly, I've never let an apprentice go once they've been qualified. Yeah. Every single one of them. I mean, a couple have left straight away, set up their own businesses and finished half my work. Shouldn't say that. It's just the way that it is. But the value that they've given within those 4 years has far outweighed anything that they've taken when they've left. And the majority of them stay. In fact, 7 of my shareholders did an apprenticeship thing. In my firm. That's how it's been. Absolutely amazing.
Good stuff. Well, I'm now going to switch to the virtual audience, and I see 2 hands up, one from Phil Warnock and one from Rachel Roddis. So I don't know if you can make the magic happen and allow Phil to speak.
Phil should be able to unmute.
Hi, is that right? You can hear me?
And
okay?
if you could tell us who you are, Phil, as well, once we're getting unmuted. I'm
unmuted. You should be able to hear me.
Oh, yes, that looks good.
Yeah. There we are. Sorry, I'm Phil from Ginger. You still. I'm unmuted though, so you should be able to hear me.
Well,
maybe go to Rachel.
We do have one chat question.
You might be able to hear me now, possibly. No.
If you can hear us, maybe put your question in chat.
So we have a question here from Saskia Harvey. She says, in his speech to the UK conference recently, Rob Halfon said We would hear more soon about government's plans to reform the regulatory requirements around apprenticeships. When are we likely to hear further detail on this, please?
Well, the obvious ministerial answer is soon, isn't it? But no, I'm due to meet Rob very shortly. We work together very closely, and you couldn't have somebody better in that seat than Rob Halfon. But I will certainly ask that question and see where we are with the reforms he's planning. But as I say, I think we're probably looking at all the different areas we talked about earlier, which is simplifying the process of transferring funds, for example. So very keen to find out where we are and those reforms will be brought forward.
And Rob Halfon is the biggest champion of
Brilliant,
these
absolutely.
things. So it's a real pleasure to see him back in government.
Yes, we've got lots of round pacing, round hills in this government. So
Good to hear.
I certainly feel like one. And a business background.
Now I don't know whether we're going to have another go with Phil.
Yeah, let's have a go. Phil, can you hear?
You're just very, very quiet. We can hear.
I think you can probably hear us.
I think it's not going to work. Can we try Rachel to see if that might work?
Yeah, Rachel, would you be able to unmute?
I've tried unmuting. I have tried unmuting. Can you hear me? Yes and no.
I've actually got a copy of Phil's question, if you'd like me to ask it.
Yes, that's great.
So Phil's question was something like, there are wonderful schemes in place like the care leaver bursary, where we offer £1,000 top up to care leavers. How are we going to go about increasing this so that care experienced people who have to pay their own rent can afford to take up an apprenticeship in a small business?
Yeah, great question, Phil. And we have a cross-ministerial. Can you hear? Turn it up. Can you hear us now? Can you hear me? No.
These hybrid meetings.
Yes. I can certainly tell this meeting anyway that we have a cross-ministerial group on care leavers, how we get more care leavers into work, and the relatively low proportion, I think 40% of care leavers don't have a job when they leave education, we're 11% across the normal population of leavers. So we know it's a big job to do. Education, so work is a key part of getting care leavers, many of whom have been through difficult circumstances, of course, into work and into wider communities. So we've got the cross-ministerial group. Phil's right, there's £1,000 bursary for those care leavers. 3,000. Oh, that's what it is. It's 3,000 there. I've got 1,000 written down here, Phil. Brilliant. So that's good news. So 3,000. Okay, so you're telling me something I didn't know, Phil. So I'll say that with Rob Halfon as well. But if that's 3,000 quid, that's great. But it's going up. It's going up. Fantastic. Okay, well, it's an important incentive, and we're fully behind it, and we're looking at lots of other ways. Really reaching out to employers actually and asking employers to look at this more seriously and set this as this initiative forward to identify care leavers they can bring into the workplace. And employers got a big role to play in this, and we engage with employers all the time, of course, in my work, and we're keen to get that message out.
And I believe we have some more chat questions, which Oliver is going to extract for us.
We might need to go through more questions in the room if we have any. So sorry.
Can someone explain to me a little bit more about degree apprenticeships? Are they still paid to go, just like a normal apprenticeship, they're paid to go to work, they actually to achieve a degree at the same, is that
Yeah, so it's just that higher level. So
Yeah.
I work for South Bank University, and we do degree apprenticeships at level 4, 5, 6, 7. And it's the same for us, it's a day release, so one day a week they come in and they'll go 4 days a week.
So who's funding your time? Is it the employer that's funding that course, and is it the government that's funding the course? Got to be university, but
The government's funding the course as far as
Yeah.
I'm aware, and then obviously the employees have to pay them the salary. In our degree apprenticeships, the employers pay into the apprenticeship levy, and then they use
you're dealing with big employers.
Apprenticeships, they're obviously at higher rates, they might not be able to hire as many degree apprenticeships, so our degree apprenticeships to £35,000 per apprentice. So if you are an SME, you can get that co-funded by the government. The 95% funded by the government, 5% funded by the organisation.
I think the interesting thing is when you have apprenticeships that require, say, particular facilities. I think that's sometimes quite difficult to access. And one of the things that we can bring to the equation is the advanced engineering facilities that we have in Derby and in Rotherham means that actually you can access that on behalf of the apprentices and so on. Because quite often I think that's a bit of a roadblock in provision, being able to access those facilities. And of course, that's the government funding part of which goes into fund that, and part of that's industry funding.
Some of that's in construction, where in your case, say in Leeds, we get us as merchants to provide the materials for the trainees to learn. The same in Hackney. There's a couple of others around the country whose names escape me. But in your world, you can't just walk into a nuclear power plant. I would imagine, in the same way that it's not good to have you use it. It depends on. So someone like a college in Leeds is dedicated towards construction and roofing and all of the various trades, but it's the sexy new modern low carbon trades or the traditional trades. Nevertheless, we would others would provide the place for them to learn. In the same way the Army would, or the RAC would, being how to be a car repair or recovery technician.
Sure.
I think that model's changed a bit. When I did my apprenticeship that a year at college, full-time.
What apprenticeship do you take?
Electrical, electrician. Yeah.
And not so all your apprentices are all electrical.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got an IT apprentice and also an office manager. My office manager literally couldn't get out. It all collapses. Literally one. Sorry about that.
It's obviously hasn't collapsed without you though.
No. I've always been on the whole. That's the idea of a good business. You can look without you. Yes, it was a 4 years in the college, and then it was 3 years on the job and getting released. Now the apprentices that I take, there's block releases, so many block releases throughout. There's that first 4 years gone, or it has within. I use it called JTL, I don't know if you know JTL. Yeah, so I use JTL for all my apprentices. So that first year, it is a concern with health and safety with 16 and 17-year-olds on site. There's no two ways about it. Really, I'm almost to the point where, I mean, if there's a 17-year-old getting towards 18, it just makes it a little bit easy. But, I mean, we still take the younger ones.
Sure.
And it would be sort of helpful to hear your thoughts, Kevin, on the announcement this week that there's going to be an apprenticeship aspect to the UCAS process for the first time. How do you envisage that working, and what sort of difference do you think it'll make?
Well, it's that's really interesting because it's I remember the first person I think that suggested that was a young backbencher called Rishi Sunak. I'm sure that was one of his policies. I think he did a sense of policies to his paper on it. Maybe right saying that. One for Rob Halfman, to be honest, because it's not one I'm fully across in terms of the announcement right now, but our university people here may have more information. Great. Okay, you can tell us a little bit.
I'm Tony Pitcher from BCS, but I was talking to the representatives from UCAS on Monday here. And yeah, in the same way, when a young person goes to, or anyone goes to apply to a basic university, as well as the courses that they are interested in, they'll be shown appropriate apprenticeship opportunities at various levels. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're only going to apply for a level 5 apprenticeship. It could be that there's if they're applying for a computing degree, then a cybersecurity apprenticeship, or a level 3 or level 4, or a level 7 artificial intelligence apprenticeship might appear in the same search. So they'll be looking at the kind of opportunities that are out there as well.
Makes perfect sense,
Yeah, one thing I would say is that as an apprenticeship training provider, we really welcome that, obviously, because we think it's great to have apprentices on par with degrees and giving students opportunities. But one thing that we're going to be quite vocal about and speak to government ministers and implementation is making sure that unique aspects of applying for an apprenticeship are not taken away, because we know that for universities, it's one sort of uniform application process, and you can apply to multiple universities. But something that makes Multiverse quite unique is our unique application system that does then ensure that we have individuals from very diverse backgrounds coming into apprenticeships. So one thing that we're really worried about is the potential risk of that being undermined by a uniform process. So that's something we will be speaking to people, and I'd be very happy to chat to anyone.
I would also add to that, there's a concern generally that it's there's a £25 fee to apply to through to go through UCAS, which you know, when you're looking at other job boards and other application processes, just doesn't apply. And in terms of social mobility, that £25 is a significant barrier to those people on that.
Can I just mention to everyone at that end of the table to speak quite loudly, because otherwise I don't think the
I've never been asked to speak more loudly.
There is sort of one elephant in the numbers of there was a time when more apprenticeships were being delivered every year. There has been a slight falling off in recent years, and I know that's very much interconnected with the efforts to make sure that all apprenticeships are high standard, rigorous. There's a sort of quality control issue here. It will be really good to hear from you, Kevin, how we're going to get back up to those previous numbers.
Well, I think it's fair to say we need to do better in terms of making sure parents think it's the right route, as we said before, and making sure that schools are more aligned with apprenticeships as being the right opportunities as well as university, and we don't see enough of that. So lots of work going on like that. Whether we need to get Oxford involved in that in terms of schools, in terms of making schools have that right kind of advice at that level, at that the right point in time. I would make the other point, though, speaking on behalf of employers here rather than just on behalf of apprentice routes, is that it's not the only way you can train your staff. You know, there's lots I've seen. I went to a fantastic new initiative called Trade Up, which is in the construction sector, which is seeking to double the number of construction workers trained every year from 10,000 to 20,000. But then much shorter courses, of course, but there are lots of different opportunities. You don't need to be skilled in everything to do with plumbing. For example, you can just be trained in how to fit a heat pump, for example, which can be shorter, easier, more cost effective for the employer. So we should look at apprenticeships as part of a full landscape in terms of how we train our people. And naturally, as I say, my position is that employers are the ones who should determine how to train the people to the best effect, rather than we simply dictate it from Westminster. So I think it's a combination of things, but we shouldn't think of it as only one route to a high-skilled, high-wage economy.
And I'm going to make one more attempt to get some virtual questions.
Yes, so we have one here from Louis from the Open University, who asks, employers are keen to see broadening of apprenticeships levy into a wider skills levy. Where does the government sit? Sherry also has questions.
Yes. Do you want me to say that one? I mean, I hear this all the time, and it feeds back into the point I just made. Really, is, you know, we believe in trusting people to get on with things and make the most of the opportunities as they see them. It's that tension between making sure we've got high quality, so that you've got the overall framework around apprenticeships and making sure they stay high quality, rather than simply just used for apprenticeships that aren't really apprenticeships. So it's making sure you retain the quality whilst giving employers discretion. I would like to see more flexibility, to be honest. I think, and this message I've certainly given to my colleagues at DFE, to give employers more discretion about how to spend the money, whether we go to a fully something more along a skills levy where employers have complete discretion. Probably a balance there to be struck, I think, in terms of maintaining quality whilst giving more flexibility. So yes, work in progress.
Additional questions?
We've got a question from Fern Carter. What are the minister's views on the piloting of portfolio apprenticeships and the logistics of how this can work, as this will be revolutionary in the technical arts, studio tech, theatre, etc.?
Wonderful. If somebody can tell me what they are, I would be really grateful. But it sounds exciting. I guess it's learning a basket of skills. Can we bring them
on the screen?
See if you can unmute.
I don't think we can do anybody on. I'm really keen to know more. If you send it through to Minister.Hollinrake at Bays, and Bays at the moment anyway, .gov.uk, that would be great. I would like to learn a lot more about that. But it sounds very exciting. And that goes back to the flexibility and making sure we're fleet of foot in terms of how the scheme operates itself, making sure that we listen to businesses voicing within this and different sectors voicing this to make sure we provide that flexibility that's needed.
In that case, I do have a second question, and this one's from Sora Gluck. And it's, what is the government doing to encourage employers to take on the 16 to 19 apprentices rather than using the funds to upskill the existing staff?
Well, there's £1,000 in it for any employer who takes that 16 to 19-year-old on, which is the natural incentive there, which is good, of course. So, and in terms of SMEs, they get 100% of the funding rather than 95%. So the financial incentive to do that. But I think there's anything wrong with retraining existing staff, though. We should, and anything wrong with training a 50-year-old or 59-year-old rather than 18-year-old. We know that lots of us are going to spend more time in the workplace than we've ever done before because of demographics. And we also, there's 575,000 people that are of working age that have left the workplace since the start of the pandemic. We know that employers are crying out for more people, particularly well-trained people. So we're trying to put those two things together. So should we allow people to be retrained at a later age? Absolutely, we should. This is, I think the whole program is this apprenticeship week is called Skills for Life. It's not just about young people, but clearly we tend to think in those terms of young people because that's where we see where you make your life choices. But and increasingly there will always be a focus around that, but it shouldn't be just that we focus on.
Thank you. I think we've got one more question from Peter Weinbloom. Does the government have a plan to introduce an annual revision process to revise apprenticeships funding bands in line with inflation or RPI, as some of the apprenticeships that we run are not viable to run with rising costs?
Well, again, please feed through to that email I was giving you earlier, because I'm really keen to hear more on that. And I'll set up with Rob Halfon, who I think it's his particular brief. But the government is, whatever people think, the government is always listening. We want to improve, we want to make it work, for everybody whilst maintaining quality. So, so it's something I'm very happy to look at.
Well, I think if that includes the online questions, there's perhaps a chance for one more in the room. If anyone wants to come back on any of the matters we raised.
Yeah. I was just going to say, because I'm actually from Newcastle, so yeah, it's just about bringing that parity of so that applicants will be able to see both undergraduate and apprenticeship opportunities in one go. I think we find that every year about nearly half of the people who go to UCAS indicate interest in apprenticeships. So I think by bringing it in this way, that it kind of just gives people the opportunity to see it in that same space. I think that's
good.
But to pay tribute to,
what about the £25 fee that was raised? Is that, you feel that's a barrier for some people?
Well, I think a lot of times now, I think if you go on the system, you can just kind of often see a lot of just undergraduate opportunities, but this is kind of about making it so that you see both opportunities for apprenticeships and undergraduate opportunities in the state space. So you can go on the hub and do even before you apply. I think it's just about being able to see those.
Okay, so you don't need to join back with just a look.
Yeah, really. So if you
can browse.
Yeah.
Okay.
And see those opportunities in space.
Okay. Okay, interesting.
So it's just worth saying that it really pays tribute to yourselves, and a number of APPGs that sort of us business and industry people go to. This is one of the ones that works for us because that question of parity of esteem, having been on both there and in here, the question, when Steve Rotherham was an MP, he was a bricklayer and he used to push that line. Obviously, he's a mayor, he's pushing you and your fellow ministers for other reasons to have trailblazers. So that question of again, my first question about is the parents who don't want their little darlings to end up. You quite rightly came back and said teachers. That is something that persistently and recurringly the officers of the APPG, Jack, the Prestige for your party, and Emma for Labour and so on and so forth, Toby Perkins, that has been a consistent call to Whitehall of parity of esteem.
Yeah.
And we will continue to erode as business people. So, but we tribute to yourselves and Secretariat for pushing that too. So that has been a long-standing push from yourselves as parliamentarians.
Well, thank you
Thank
for those supportive words about the APPG.
Yeah.
We do feel that, you know, we absolutely want to be a part of changing perceptions of apprenticeships in the way, you know, everyone around the table has emphasised today. So it's my great pleasure to start to wrap up. I think it's been tremendously helpful to hear from Minister Hollinrake. Thank you again for your time and your commitment on this really important issue. I think you've given us all a task to go out and evangelise for apprenticeships for people of all ages, but obviously particularly for giving opportunities to young people. I certainly take away from this that part of the job of selling the idea of an apprenticeship requires that people have confidence that they're all going to be, you know, high standards, worthwhile things to do, and so maintaining those high standards and promoting career apprenticeships, I think, is also a part of that. I very much welcome the UCAS changes. I think that is, I hope, is going to play a role in further broadening the understanding of the fantastic life and career opportunities people can get if they choose the apprenticeship route. The straightforward university route works for many, but for many others, apprenticeships are offer hugely beneficial opportunities. Great to have some online contributions. I'm sorry the online audience didn't get to participate in quite the way we would hope, but at least we got some of those questions through on the chat. And I think it was very helpful to have the matter of care leavers raised. I mean, obviously, in so many ways, care leavers have been failed over the years. And if we can use access to apprenticeships to make sure that care leavers get the best possible start to their working life, I think we will have achieved something really wonderful and special. So I think that is more or less all I need to say before we wrap up the meeting. But thank you everyone who's taken part, and we hope to welcome you to future APPG discussions, and I wish you well for what I hope is going to be a very successful National Apprenticeships Week for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great, very interesting.